It's a new decade. We're going to talk about the top books on the CGC population count for the year 1980. Coming up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, you know what to do down below. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video. Links to my Instagram, my whatnot, my eBay store, and my email. So we do this every week. We come to you with the top 10 books on the CGC population report for that year. We also look at the top 10 books outside of the top 10 overall for both DC and Marvel, as well as other keys and the top book for each major publisher. And we're in the era of moving kind of a little bit away from undergrounds, more into independence, true independence. And smaller publishers still exist, like, or publishers that are smaller in terms of collectability, like Harvey and Charlton and Archie. But DC and Marvel are going to rule the day for quite a number of years. Now, we've done this every week for the last almost a year now. We started with pre-1934, and now we're up to 1980. We're going to go all the way through 2025, and that will be in about 46 weeks. So, I guess in 45 weeks when you don't include this week. Anyway, we're going to conclude, I guess, June or July of 2026, because then we'll have data on books from 2025. So I use cgcdata.com. I only look at universal blue labels. And even though there is a distinction now between newsstand and direct, there is not in the CGC population report. Even though a few years ago they started denoting that on the label, it's the same as Mark Jewelers. They aren't listed differently in the census. If you want that information, you can go to sales data for those like Go Collect or GP Analysis will have that information. So we count down the top 10. We're going to start there. And at number 10 on our list is Amazing Spider-Man number 210, the first appearance of Madam Web. Denny O'Neil did the story, John Romita and Joe Sinnott did the art, John Romita Jr. Romita Jr. and Al Milgrom did the cover of this classic villain. Now, here's a book that was driven during the comic boom by movie speculation. We kind of have this interesting alchemy going on between the comic boom and the speculation market. So we have books like this that are keys, but during the comic boom, people started submitting more books in grades, a little bit lower grades, higher than 9.8 or even 9.6, like, 8.85s that before the comic boom and today don't have a whole lot of value, but they were also built around this speculation and anticipation of TV projects and movies. And we're going to see quite an effect of that on this list. I would say almost half the top 10 has been promoted by those kinds of things. So if you saw the Madam Web film, it didn't fare that well. It didn't boost the value of this book. That kind of reached its peak prior to when the movie came out. This total number of blue label copies on the population report is 3,813. Going to number 9 on the list is another one that is somewhat, it's a key, but also movie speculation. This was a little bit earlier because the movie came out much earlier than Madam Web. This is Avengers number 196, the first full appearance of Taskmaster. Dave Michelini did the story. George Perez did the art and the cover. A classic villain who a lot of fans were disappointed with the adaptation of the villain in the Black Widow film. I don't think there was enough time leading up to the film to really boost the submissions of this book like it did with Madam Web, and we'll see with a couple of other books on the list. Taskmaster is a very popular antagonist in Marvel Comics, and even recently had his own series, a character who can mimic the fighting abilities of any opponent Captain America, be it the Mark's archery skill of Hawkeye or the fencing ability of Swordsman. So, and a really cool George Perez cover. Interesting about this book is of the top 10, it does have the lowest mean grade of 8.35. Most of the others in the high 8s, low 9s, which makes sense. So this was a book that I think before the boom did have a decent amount of value, and it was considered a key. Now, like with a lot of other books that are available, and books from 1980 forward are available, especially in higher grade, more got submitted. And again, people were also submitting, myself included, books like 7.5s and 8.0s of some of these keys, and they still were fetching values in 2022 and 2023, or 2021, 2022. Not so much today. Total number of copies on the population report, 4,682. At number 8 on the list is DC Comics Presents number 26. This is the first appearance in preview of the new Teen Titans and the first appearances of Starfire, Raven, and Cyborg. And the reintroduction of Beast Boy, who at this point in time was called Changeling. Marv Wolfman did the story, and George Perez did the art and the insert. Now, so DC was doing this. I think it was the first book they did this. They did this throughout the 80s in a number of books where they had a preview. And you can see on the left-hand side of the cover, you see this tiny little cover for New Teen Titans. It was basically a 16-page insert. You have the regular story, which was done by Jim Starlin. And he also did the cover. People complain about it. It's not a good New Teen Titans cover, but I think it's a good cover, on its own merit. If that was like the full image, I think it would be a pretty cool cover. The New Teen Titans really kind of revitalized DC. That was, I talked in the last episode about how 1979 there wasn't a lot of creativity as they're trying to come back from the implosion. We're starting to see more here, including actually in this multi-part story by Starlin in DC Comics Presents. We'll talk more about that later. So they did do more of these insert previews for first appearances of characters like Captain Carrot and Blue Devil and Amethyst. So I think it mutes the importance of the first appearance, and we will talk about that a little bit later on the list. This one, total number of copies in the population report, 5,172. Number 7 on the list is X-Men 137. This is the conclusion of the Phoenix saga and the death of Phoenix. Classic cover by John Byrne, of course, this Claremont and Byrne book. Really a culmination of the storyline that had been building up for over a year. Interesting, this is a larger size book. It's double sized, and it is square bound. So it is a little bit trickier. I wouldn't say more difficult, but trickier to get in 9.8 because, sometimes that the staples poke through or the glue that attached the cover, it causes like a little bit of rippling. So it is also a trickier book to try to identify if it is a potential 9.8. Now, the funny thing about this is I kind of like this about the cover here. You see at the top, it has this advertisement, which really kind of eats into the cover. This Marvel comic could be worth $2,500 to you. So I guess there was a giveaway of some sort, whatever it was. But it was worth more than $2,500 to somebody because somebody got this graded in a 9.8, or I'm sorry, in a 9.9 and sold it in 2017 for $3,107. So it was worth more than $2,500 to that person. And I guess it was worth more than $2,500 to the person who bought it. The total number of Blue Label copies on the population report for this book is 5,408. To number 6 on the list, and is X-Men number 130. Boy, this is a book, it is a key. And it kind of rides along with these other X-Men books, but I think it got elevated on the list because of all of the speculation, and it turns out it was only that. It was blind speculation that Taylor Swift would be portraying Dazzler in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie. Guess what? Spoiler warning, it didn't happen. So this book was, in the first part of 2024, was on the hot list every single week as people were trying to acquire copies, thinking that Taylor Swift would portray Dazzler. It didn't happen, but it's still a book of value. The first appearance of Dazzler. She got her own title later on, and in 1981, that's a whole other story. And it is a really cool cover. I think the cover's by Romita, and Romita Jr. and Byrne did the interior art, and of course Chris Claremont wrote the story, as with all of these X-Men books in this era. Total number of copies on the census, 5,753. Number 5 on the list, we have another DC book. It's another New Teen Titans book, and is issue number 2 of their own series, Wolfman and Perez. This is the first appearance of Deathstroke, the Terminator, Slade Wilson. Not Deadpool Wade Wilson, but Deathstroke Slade Wilson, who is become one of the more popular villains / anti-heroes in the DC canon. He's in the cover there, kind of in shadow, where his son is in the foreground. He was a little problematic in some of the stuff that he did in with Terra later on in this run, but just a big book. And I think the thing with this book is I don't think DC anticipated the Teen Titans to be the hit that it was. So I don't know how high the print count was relative to other books of this era. So I mean, I was a Teen Titans fan at the time, and I grabbed this off the stands. So, the print run pretty quickly became pretty high, because New Teen Titans books in general, like, starting with issue 5, are fairly easy to find. Issue number 2, it'll be picked out of any collection that's been gone through once, and ends up on the census, 7,050 copies on the census. At number 4 on the list is Star Wars number 42, the first full appearance in comics of Boba Fett. And there's a 4th part of the adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back. Archie Goodwin did the story. Al Williamson and Carlos Garzón did the cover and the art. TV show speculation, right? The book of Boba Fett after The Mandalorian, highly anticipated heading into the comic boom. The prices skyrocketed, then plummeted. Really plummeted. Because the Book of Boba Fett TV series wasn't nearly as well received as The Mandalorian had been, and it was a little bit of a disappointment for Star Wars fans. Again, this, most of you experienced it in 2020 to 2022, this anticipation of new content. And Disney Plus hit the ground running with the Vision and Scarlet Witch and Mandalorian. All right, one of the best MCU shows and one of the best Star Wars shows that they've come out with. And those were really popular, and it just generated fan interest like crazy. And it also generated, subscribers to Disney Plus, which was the point, but it also generated interest in this book and a couple of other books in the Star Wars canon. His first appearance, there was a magazine adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, which then got serialized into, was it 4 or 5 parts in the Star Wars run? Whereas meanwhile, from issue 7 through 39 through 38 were non-canonical stories that were just stories that were made up at Marvel. Then they adapted Empire Strikes Back. It also has the first appearances of Yoda and Lando Calrissian, but the most popular one, because of the TV show that came out when it did. There has been talk about a Lando TV series, but I haven't heard much about that in a couple of years. Really, with the comic boom, a lot of people submitted this book, and it comes in number 4 on the list with 7,567 copies. And number 3 on the list is X-Men number 129, Claremont and Byrne. The first appearance of Kitty Pryde, Emma Frost, and Sebastian Shaw. that triple key, and it's right in the midst of the Dark Phoenix storyline, also with the Hellfire Club involved. There are a lot of storytelling pieces, and again, this is when X-Men was getting to the heights of its popularity during the storyline in the 1980s. This is a key, sought-after book by collectors of X-Men, sought after in high grade. Although I find it interesting that I don't think Kitty Pryde is one of the big major characters in X-Men lore, but this first appearance is quite sought after. The fact that it's 1980, just the beginning of the direct market, it's harder to get in high grade. So that kind of explains it. So at any rate, the a very sought after book, and there are also plenty of collectors who want to build an X-Men run. Sometimes the entire Claremont run, sometimes the whole run, sometimes just 94 to 143, the Cockrum and Burns stuff, maybe 94 to 200, whatever it is. This is usually part of what they want to have in their collection. There's not many X-Men collectors who are like, yeah, I don't want 129. I'm going to stop with 128. If anything, the more niche collectors would be the ones that, a more affordable route would be like 200 to 300 or something like that. Or they'd be like, I just want the Silver Age stuff. Great reads, too. And that's what enhanced the popularity of the characters. Total number of copies on the census, 7,582. Now, numbers 1 and 2 are way, way far ahead of this. Two reasons for that. I think the books were in abundant supply because they're both number 1 issues and driven by speculation around TV series. So number 2 on the list is Moon Knight number 1, his first solo series and the first appearance of Bushman. Doug Mensch did the story, Bill Sienkiewicz did the cover and the art when he was more in his Neil Adams clone phase. The title ran for 38 issues, and let's face it, the TV series really drove this book. People were clamoring because Werewolf by Night 32 is a more difficult book to get, and then it's like the second appearance and the first solo appearance in the first solo series. I remember being at the second Terrificon setup, and I think almost every dealer had a copy of Moon Knight number 1 on their wall. This was, everybody was pulling this book out of mothballs, sending it in to get it graded, and that was before the TV series came out, because that was kind of when it was its height. I did like I did have a Marvel Spotlight 32 that I sold, a mid-grade copy for like $5.50. People were clamoring over it, and again, height of the market, all that sort of stuff. People were submitting this book. 11,688 copies in the population report. Number 1 on the list, similar situation. Savage She-Hulk number 1, the first appearance of Jen Walters She-Hulk, written by Stan Lee, the final character that he created at Marvel. John Buscema did the art, and with Chick Stone did the inks, and John Buscema did the cover. Cousin of the Incredible Hulk gets a blood transfusion from her cousin and transforms her into the Savage She-Hulk. There was a secondary series that was started by John Byrne that's quite popular because of some of the covers, where she was less savage and more, she was sensational. The sexier She-Hulk. And again, the TV series, the anticipation of that led to people pulling this book out, collectors wanting it, people speculating on it. TV series came and went, and now most of the people that really wanted their copies at the time have them. And this the series did run for 25 issues, and we'll see if the character comes back in the MCU, and if that'll give this book a boost. But the thing is, with books like this, right, compared to the value graded books, compared to the value in 2019, the supply has increased because people brought it out, got it graded. The demand went up, but then it's come back down. There are a total of 14,904 copies of this book on the census. So let's go to the fill out the top 10 for both Marvel and DC. The top 10 had 8 Marvel and 2 DC, so we need 2 more Marvel. And coming in at number 11 overall on the list is X-Men number 133, Claremont and Byrne. this solo kind of Wolverine story, his first solo cover, where he has to battle underneath the Hellfire Club through all these minions. And it's a very popular book amongst collectors. Again, also part of the Dark Phoenix storyline, the Hellfire Club storyline. Claremont did a great job of weaving all of these ongoing stories throughout the issues, but giving the individual issues great moments to explore. This has 3,770 copies in the census. The 10th Marvel book, number 12 overall on the list, is X-Men number 134, Claremont and Byrne, where Phoenix becomes Dark Phoenix. We have the inclusion of the Hellfire Club. The 12 X-Men books that came out in 1980 all are in the top 21 on the population report for 1980. So it's 12 X-Men books and 9 other books. So X-Men really dominating the day at this point in time. It was probably the bestseller at Marvel, I'm pretty sure, at this point in time. So there are plenty of copies out there, plenty of collectors that want it. This one comes in at 3,719 copies on the census. Now let's round out the DC top 10. Their third book, number 19 overall on the list, is New Teen Titans number 1, Wolfman and Perez. This began an ongoing series that ran for 91 issues. After starting with issue 41, is renamed Tales of the Teen Titans, as DC split it off and they started a volume 2 of New Teen Titans, was direct only. And then Tales of the Teen Titans, starting with issue 59, contained reprints of the books from the second volume with some really cool covers, by the way. And then finally with 91, they reprinted the DC Comics Presents 26 story, and that was it. So if this was the cover of their first appearance, I think the book would be much more valuable than DC Comics Presents 26, because of how well the characters, especially the new characters, are featured on the cover. This quickly became DC's most popular book, rivaling X-Men in terms of popularity, because it was similar. Perez had come over from Marvel working for DC, and they kind of threw him and Wolfman this bone of, we'll try Teen Titans again, right? It had run from the 60s into the early 70s, was canceled, briefly brought back in the late 70s, and I don't think DC had any idea that this would become a big seller. They didn't have any belief in the book. But Wolfman and Perez hit it out of the park issue after issue. Of course, we've had adaptations on the small screen, even the big screen. There was the TV series, the live action series. There was the animated series, right, in the anime style. And then that led into the Teen Titans Go Kids series, which has made these characters, right, the 5 that they use in that, Starfire, Raven, Beast Boy, Robin, and Cyborg, household names. Robin already was, but you know what I mean. Household names. Anybody like in their mid-20s or younger knows those characters from seeing Teen Titans Go, even a few times. So this is a comic of high visibility, and introducing 3 new characters that have become mainstays of DC Comics, and really reinvigorating the Teen Titans brand. Again, I love this book. Just a quick personal story, right? So I had collected Teen Titans when it came out. I got a few issues early on. I was very young when it was canceled. Then they brought it back in the late 70s, and I collected every issue. I was a fan of Teen Titans. And then so when I heard there was going to be a new series, I'm like, and I had a subscription to DC Comics Presents. I said to my LCS, I'm like, yeah, put it on my list. But for some reason, I didn't get number 1. And I think what happened was that the demand for it was higher than DC or the distributors or the comic shops anticipated. So my copy went elsewhere. 50-cent cover price. I had to wait to a show like several months later to pay $5 to get a copy. But that was my acquisition of New Teen Titans number 1. So there are just 2,686 copies on the census. At the next book is a Marvel Key, Marvel Team Up number 95, the first appearance of Mockingbird. Again, this got pushed a little bit by speculation that Linda Cardellini character was going to be Mockingbird, kind of hinted at, never really fully developed, at least so far. Stephen Grant did the story, Jimmy Jones and Bruce Patterson the art, and Frank Miller and Bob McLeod did the cover. There are 1,655 copies on the census. Another Marvel book, and I find this interesting to be this high on the list. It's Star Trek #1 from Marvel Comics. This is the adaptation of the Star Trek the Motion Picture, the 1979 film directed by Robert Wise, who had previously directed films like, he co-directed, West Side Story. That's what he directed. He's directed a lot of films. Marv Wolfman did the story, Cockrum and Klaus Janson did the art, and Steve Leahola did the cover. The motion picture, which brought back the characters from the original television series, did well, wasn't overwhelmingly well received. Subsequent films did better. Marvel had this series. They adapted the movie, and then the title ran for 18 issues. Again, very few books outside the original Go Key series for Star Trek have any key significance or are very highly collectible. This one, a little bit. 1,276 copies on the census. Another Marvel book is Marvel Spotlight Volume 2, number 6. This is the first appearance of Star-Lord, Peter Quill in comics. Doug mentioned the story, Tom Sutton the art, Bill Sienkiewicz and Joe Rubinstein the cover. Of course, Star-Lord, again, movies. Not so much speculation, because speculation, to me, centers a lot around the comic boom. Star-Lord was promoted into popularity by movies that came out earlier, and has maintained that popularity, right? The Guardians of the Galaxy movies with Chris Pratt's adaptation of Star-Lord have kind of set the popularity that character had, because I think the collectability of the book followed his appearances in the movies to some degree. 1,123 copies on the census. The fourth DC book on the list is DC Comics Presents number 27. This is a continuation of the Starlin drawn story. He did the cover here. Len Wein did the story. There's a backup about Congo-Rilla. This is the first appearance of Mongol, a villain, a very powerful cosmic villain who can go toe-to-toe with Superman at times. So you see, he's able to go against the team of John Jones, Manhunter from Mars, and Superman. So this is a collectible book. And again, as I said, the Starlin cover is really cool. I think 26 without the Teen Titans. I think both books, well, 26 wouldn't have nearly the value, but I think the cover would look better. And New Teen Titans 1 would have been much more valuable and much higher on the list if it had been the Perez cover that we saw in New Teen Titans #1. Alas, here's what we have. There are 566 copies on the census. The next book is it's from a Marvel imprint. It's Epic Illustrated #3. I decided to include this book. Paul Galassi did the cover. This is a magazine that had more mature storylines and more of a science fiction bent. There are 384 copies on the census, on the population report. Our next book on the list is a book that's driven by DC speculation, and that's because this is one of those books that went from nowhere to popularity in an instant because of James Gunn. This is Weird War Tales number 93, and it's the first appearance of the Creature Commandos. Weird War Tales, not a big seller for DC. This was a dollar bin book for a while, a minor key first appearance of the Creature Commandos. They did have their own series in the 2000s. J.M. DeMatteis did the story. Pat Broderick and Dennis Cowan did the art, and Joe Kubert did the cover. This is not exactly the same Creature Commandos that we saw in the DC animated series to become part of the DCU. Here's the interesting thing about this book, right? So, just prior to the announcement that there would be an animated series, there were a total of, I think it was 58 copies in the census. Now there are 257 copies on the census. So 200 copies, about 5 times the number of copies in the couple of years since, or 2.5 years since this was announced. Because prior to this, maybe if you had a 9.8 you would submit it, but it wasn't really a very popular book. It would be one people would look past in bins. Now it's one of those things that, it's Creature Commandos' first appearance. Let's get that. There are, like I said, a total of 257 copies on the census. Rounding out DC's top 10 at number 6 is Batman number 323, Catwoman cover. Catman has a cameo on the last page. He's a character from the 60s, different than the Golden Age Catman, slightly. Len Wein did the story, Irv Novak and Bob Smith did the art, and Dick Giordano did the cover. Again, there were 225 copies in the census. The next book on the list is Batman number 324. This is a classic cover by Jim Aparo. Same creators on the interiors. This cover really helps drive this book. 221 copies in the census. 8th DC book on the list is Batman number 321. Len Wein did the story. Walt Simonson and Dick Giordano did the art, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did the cover. It's a classic Joker cover. Since the Golden Age, that's going to drive collectability of the book. 211 copies in the census. So a lot of Batman, right? Filling out the list. DC starting to get some of their mojo back a little bit, but that's kind of centered around the new Teen Titans. We'll see a little bit more in the coming years, I hope. The number 9 DC book on the list is Untold Legend of the Batman number 1. This was a 3-issue miniseries. It's the first time Len Wein did the story, John Byrne and Jim Aparo did the interior art, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did the cover. This is the first time John Byrne did work for DC. Minor key significance. 180 copies on the census. And the number 10 book on the list is Justice League of America number 184. Classic cover. This is one of the annual JLA JSA crossover. Here they crossed over with the New Gods. This is the third of a 3-part storyline. Jerry Conway did the story. George Perez did the cover and the art. Sadly, the first issue of this was done by Dick Dillon, who was a Justice League artist for, I think, about 15 years. Started working on issue 60-something and did every single issue there up until he had a fatal heart attack. And then George Perez took over, finishing the 3-part storyline here. Classic cover by Perez. All these characters, Darkseid in the middle. 166 copies in the census. Now, I did want to talk about the 11th DC book because it kind of struck me as odd, because this is the 11th DC book, but boy, is this particular book a complete nothing burger. It is a book that is not really that collectible. It's The New Adventures of Superboy number 1. Carrie Bates did the story. Kurt Schaffenberger and Dave Hunt did the art. Schaffenberger and Giordano the cover. And the first electrifying issue gets this birthday cake cover. Now, The New Adventures of Superboy ran for, 54 issues. And it's basically what happened at the time was the title Superboy eventually became Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, and then it split off into 2 books. The Legion of Superheroes had their own book, which became very popular, one of DC's better sellers, and then Superboy was eliminated from that book, leaving the Legion on their own, and it went back to this. These stories were very, very corny, they were almost like Silver Age stories. Without this extra candle, you can't celebrate your 16th birthday. Why? What's the secret? I mean, it's not that exciting. I don't know if it was aimed for a younger audience or whatever, but like a couple of sales of this in a 9/8 newsstand maybe have crept over $100 over the years, but I think the last sale of a 9/8 direct was $21. So to have it this high on the list just shows like DC, they hadn't yet really hit their stride. That truth be told, though, Marvel, other than X-Men, right? X-Men dominated the list. They did have some number 1s. So we'll see how the next couple of years progress. So now let's go to some other publishers. Oh, what can I say? The next book, for the top book from Whitman, is Uncle Scrooge number 179. Now, this is a very expensive book because it's one of several Uncle Scrooge books, and I guess this is the most collectible. They were only distributed in Whitman multi-packs. These never hit newsstands, so they're very hard to find, and probably a decent copy, like I think like a 9.0 is about $1,000 of this book. So collectors do seek it out. Disney collectors do seek this out because it's very hard to find. 142 copies on the census. Top book from Aardvark Vanaheim is Cerebus, the Aardvark, number 21, created by Dave Sim. This is the first appearance of Captain Cockroach. Cockroach, like Captain America. There are a total of 67 copies on the census. Next book is a magazine from Paradise Press, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, the official collector's edition. It has articles and photos about the movie. It basically was, you'll see them, like if you see in the newsstands now, you'll see like a special, People magazine about a certain movie, even an older movie. This was a promotional magazine to come out in conjunction with the release of the movie. It's not really a comic book per se, but I included it, 53 copies on the census. Top book from Warren is Vampirella number 88. It's the winner of the Warren Creator Awards. It had the 1979 Warren Creator Awards. I think if you look at the cover, you can figure out why this is popular among Vampy collectors. 53 copies on the census. The top book from Comic Reader. This is a curious one. Top book from Street Enterprises is Comic Reader number 179, which has this photo cover of Stan Lee, which basically has an obituary saying he will be missed, and then in the little corner, April Fool. Yeah, joking about somebody's death, I'm not sure is really all that funny. But the Stan Lee photo cover makes it popular among collectors. There are a total of 42 copies on the census. From the top book from Fantagraphics is Comics Journal number 58, which is the first cover appearance of Elektra, predating Daredevil 168. Daredevil 168 is cover dated January 1981. I'm sure we'll see it on next year's list. So it came out a few months earlier. It probably came out around the same time, but this evidently predates it. And so, yeah, it really is the true first published appearance of Elektra. There are 28 copies on the census. The top book from EC is Mad Disco, which is a disco. I actually have a copy of this with the record. I don't have a record player, though. I'm sure I can find this on YouTube. It has like this floppy vinyl record, which is also like what they put in Nexus number 3 in there. And Alfred E. Newman doing his John Travolta impersonation. Top book from EC, 28 copies on the census. Top book from Gold Key is Battle of the Planets number 5. We went into great detail about the Battle of the Planets in the last week's episode. Gold Key didn't have a lot else going on at this time. This was probably one of their more popular TV adaptations. 25 copies on the census. That ties it with the top book from Visions Publishing, which is Visions number 2. This has the second appearance of the Flaming Carrot, and there are 25 copies of this on the census. Our next book is the top book from Charlton, and it is Charlton Classics number 1. This was a 9-issue series. Each of the series starred Hercules, and it reprinted stories from his Charlton book from the late 1960s with backups from one of their horror anthologies. Again, it ran for 9 issues. There are 16 copies on the census. That ties it with the top book from Last Gasp, which is Cocaine Comics number 2, which has a lot of R.I.P. Snorton cocaine comics. Yeah, it has a lot of underground artists affiliated with it, and it has also 16 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from Warp Graphics, which is ElfQuest number 8. We talked about ElfQuest in the last couple of episodes by Wendy and Richard Peeney. Their vision, this was essentially, at this time, all they were publishing, so it's going to be their top book for the year. One of the ElfQuest issues, 16 copies on the census. Top book from Kitchen Sink is Bizarre Sex number 8. R. Crumb did the cover, and it's going to be very specific collectors that go after this title. Depravity, perversity, licentiousness. 15 copies on the census. Top book from HM Communications is Heavy Metal number 39. H.R. Geiger did the cover and also had a gallery inside the adult fantasy science fiction magazine. 13 copies on the census. From the top book from Raw Books is Mouse, A Survivor's Tale number 1 by Art Spiegelman. Now, this is smaller than a comic book. So Art Spiegelman and his wife, Françoise Mouly, produced Raw magazine. So issue number 2 started the serialization of the Mouse storyline. Of course, Mouse had his first appearance back in Funny Aminals number 1 from 1973, off the top of my head. He expanded upon the story and serialized it in this magazine. Now, the magazine was treasury sized, so you're not going to see those slabbed. Treasury sized. You're not going to see those slabbed, but evidently this book was fixed to the back inside cover. So I guess it's impossible to get in high grade, but it is the first Mouse solo comic book, and an important part of comic book history, because when Spiegelman put all the pieces of the story together, edited a little bit for the graphic novel, that became something that has been a very important literary work, to be honest. And it kind of was when, was it God's Plan? Will Eisner published in like 1978 as the first true graphic novel, trying to make the medium a little more serious. Spiegelman decided to follow that lead and use anthropomorphic animals to tell his story. He had been part of the underground scene, and had published some other books that were more underground than independent, I would say. But this is independent because it is telling, I think, more so than underground. It's telling a specific story, and of course, the number of reprints of this book, of the graphic novel over the years, it's like often reading in English classes in middle school or high school. So it is a very, very important book. Basically, he uses mice and rats, or cats, mice and cats, to tell the story of the Holocaust, as was relayed to him from his father, who was a survivor. So it's a very personal story. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the independent movement. With the Peonies, they had, not to the gravity of this story, but it was a personal story for them to tell. Harvey Picar's personal stories. So that, I think, really describes the independent movement of the late 70s, early 80s. This particular book, there are just 12 copies on the census. That ties it with the top book from San Francisco, which is San Francisco Comic Book number 5. Willie Murphy did the cover and art. I don't know much else about this, other than there are also 12 copies on the census. With the next book, as we move along, from Spire Christian, another Archie book from Spire Christian. Interestingly, often the Spire Christian Archie books have more copies on the census than any of the Archie books, unless there's innuendo in the Archie books, which oddly is not the stories that Spire Christian published. Al Hartley did this, and it's Archie's Festival. 11 copies on the census. That's going to tie it with the top book from Comley Comics, which is Captain Canuck number 11. We went into detail on this when we had issue number 1. Also 11 copies on the census. That also ties it with the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, the top book from Rip Off Press. There, issue number 6 by Gilbert Shelton, did the cover and art. The Freak Brothers and Fat Freddy's Cat, a mainstay of underground, coming out of San Francisco. San Francisco really was the birthplace of the underground comic. Also 11 copies on the census. And finally tying it with Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman #1 by David Boswell. This was a story that he had published in the newspaper The Georgia Straight, which is from Vancouver, British Columbia, not from Georgia. And he collected those stories into this book. Later on, it was Eclipse, I believe, that published a short-lived series of his stories, but this is he brought together those stories he'd done in the magazine into this in the newspaper into this magazine-sized book. And this one also 11 copies on the census. Top book from Harvey is Casper TV Showtime #1. Yeah. So yeah, these kids are delighted by having a ghost come out of their screen because they haven't seen Poltergeist. Came out in what, 1983? Casper TV Showtime #1, 10 copies on the census from Harvey Pekar. He is American Splendor #5, which also includes art by R. Crumb. But this is, again, Harvey Pekar. He published about once a year, his book. There are 9 copies on the census. And the top Archie book is Sabrina the Teenage Witch #62. Maybe because Sabrina's in a bikini. I don't know. Only 2 copies on the census. And that's going to do it for our top 10 list. Or our top list of 1980. So we're covering 1980. We will be back next week with the top books from 1981. I'd like to thank you for stopping by and spending some time with us. I hope you enjoy. You can take a look at a couple of the other videos in the series. Just look at the playlist, has them all. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying, until next time, enjoy your comics.